Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday. How is everyone doing? I hope you're all keeping safe. I hope you're not too bored in lockdown. If you're in lockdown, are you in lockdown? Let me know down below because I'm not, but I know a lot of people are. So let me know how it's going. If you are in lockdown, I hope some YouTube is enough to keep you entertained and occupied for a little bit of time. Today, we're looking into a very disturbing case, the case of Daniel Bartlam, the 14-year-old child who killed his own mother. Daniel Bartlam was born on November the 11th, 1996, and he grew up in a pretty happy household. He grew up being very financially secure. He went to a private school where he had a number of friends, and he was a relatively good, normal child up until around 9 years old. At 9 years old, Daniel's younger brother, he was born, and at that time, his mum and his dad had begun to get a divorce. Daniel struggled with his parents splitting up pretty badly. He didn't really know how to handle it. He didn't really understand it. He was only 9 years old and he was just really angry and really confused and felt frustrated, like no one would listen. The divorce caused a little bit of a financial strain, in particular for Daniel's mother, and she's the one who ended up with the kids. So she had to look after these two boys with a lot less money than she was used to having, and that just put a lot of strain on the household. That meant that Daniel could no longer go to a private school because they could no longer afford a private school, and this freaked Daniel out. He didn't want to go to a normal school. He liked the school he was in, and he fought really hard against his parents about changing schools, but they didn't really have a choice. They weren't doing it to punish him. They just literally couldn't afford it anymore, and he couldn't understand why that was. So he started acting out a lot. And when he started acting out, his mum had no idea how to handle it. She didn't know how to understand him. She didn't know how to get him to understand her. She didn't know how to diffuse this situation. Once he did change schools, he had a really bad attitude going into it, and he didn't get along with most of the kids, and he got teased a little bit because he was from a private school, and he just had a really hard time getting used to it. And because of this, and because of how frustrated he felt that he was even at this school to begin with and doing all this stuff, and his parents were getting divorced and no one was listening to him, he became very self-isolated. He didn't really leave the house. He would stay in his room. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He was very antisocial. He didn't have any friends at school. He didn't have any friends anywhere, and he wouldn't hang out with his brother or his mum or his mum's boyfriend. He would just stay in his room and watch movies. That's all he would do, movies or TV shows. Around this time, Daniel's mum, whose name was Jacqueline, by the way, Jacqueline is Daniel's mum, she began to get sort of really serious with her boyfriend, who she'd been dating for a while. The kids knew him, but it got to the point where they were considering moving in together. This would especially help with the financial situation because it means they could obviously go halves and everything. He could sell his house and she would sell hers and move into a new house. And Daniel didn't want this to happen though. He didn't want a new house, he didn't want to move, he didn't want to leave, and he didn't want this new boyfriend to be living with them. He didn't like change. He liked things how it was, and he liked to be in control. And when he felt like he was out of control, he lost his shit. And his mum tried to sort of cater to that. And so for a long time, she wouldn't move because he didn't want to. But eventually, they didn't really have a choice. So they ended up moving and they lived in Nottingham, and it was just Jacqueline, her boyfriend, the family dog, whose name was Meg, obviously Daniel, and then Daniel's younger brother. So as I mentioned, he was so antisocial at this point. He was so self-isolated. All he did at this new house was the same thing. He would sit and watch TV shows and he would analyze them and he'd write notes about them, and he'd get really, really into it. It was like his escape from his world that he didn't like. And he loved shows about crime. He loved murder mystery shows, especially the soap murder mystery shows, you know, those dramatic ones like Summer Midnight Murders or whatever the fuck that show's called, those kind of shows. And in particular, he loved Coronation Street. That was his all-time favorite. And he was fascinated, if not obsessed, with the character John State or something like that. I don't know, I've never seen the show. So there was this one episode in particular where this John character, he attacks this other character called Charlotte with a hammer, and he bludgeons her to death with this hammer. And then he sets her on fire, sets the place on fire to get rid of, like, cover his tracks, get rid of the evidence, and essentially he got away with murder. For some reason, whatever reason, Daniel took an especial liking. You right there? Fuck. For some reason, Daniel took like a very big interest in this one particular episode. He absolutely loved it. He obsessed over it. He analyzed it. He would write notes about it. He'd look into it. And then from there, he sort of started looking into how to get away with murder. And half of his research would be like somewhat legitimate research, like on Google, looking at actual forensic, you know, that type of stuff of how to get away with murder. And the rest of his research was watching more TV shows, murder mystery shows. And it was like he believed it was real, which obviously maybe you wouldn't realize at that age, but being a little bit older, you can obviously watch one of these soap opera type murder mystery shows and you know it's very unrealistic. It's very unlikely to ever happen like that. There's a lot of like loopholes and things that are just very dramatic and untrue. So obviously not reliable research. So eventually Daniel got inspiration and he wrote a script about one of these soapy dramatic murder mysteries, except he wrote himself as being the main character. He wrote himself as being this mastermind criminal murderer who had murdered plenty of people and gotten away with all of it, and he'd gotten away with assaults and even rapes. In his story though, there was one murder that he couldn't, you know, escape from, get away from. So he had to get creative and he had to burn the place down so that he could escape and get away with murder. So obviously this is very similar to what happened in Coronation Street with John. He even used the same weapon. He used a hammer, and it was a very detailed story about basically him as the main character killing his mother with a hammer and then burning the place up so that he could get away with it. On Easter Sunday 2011, Daniel started his day like any other day. He ate a shit ton of Easter eggs, and then he took his dog Meg to an appointment, and then he came home, he played video games. He had one sort of tiff with his brother and his mum over a video game, but it wasn't anything unusual. It was only sort of a small argument. Normally he would blow up worse than he did. So to Jacqueline, this was fine. This was an everyday occurrence. Jacqueline's boyfriend said that there was a lot of times where Daniel's anger would just build up and it would just reach boiling point, and he would get to a point where he was screaming and yelling and getting right up in Jacqueline's face, almost touching faces, and the boyfriend would get really quite afraid that he would attack her or hurt her or do something, so he would have to get in between them and split them apart. So this tiny little fight was nothing in comparison to the things that Jacqueline was used to dealing with. The only difference is that her boyfriend wasn't actually home this Easter. He was away for work. So that's really the only difference. So I'm sure she was grateful that it didn't escalate, but at the time she thought it was fine. So sometime early that morning, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., around that time, Daniel goes into his mother's room and wakes her up and is asking her about these new runners, these new trainers that he had, and it's unclear what exactly Jacqueline said back to him, but whatever she said, he mustn't have liked, because it turned into a very explosive argument, like the type of arguments where he can't control his anger, where he's starting to kick things and punch things and absolutely lose it. So he goes and gets a hammer and he bashes his mum's head in with the hammer and fractures her bones, breaks her face, it's disgusting. And he beats her to death in the exact way that he had described it in his little script. He then shoves newspaper all around her body, on top of her body, and he pours gasoline all over her and her room. At this point, he lights his mother's body on fire, watches the room go up in flames, and then he runs and goes and gets his brother, tells the brother he needs to go get help from the neighbors. And by the time the brother comes back with the neighbors, Daniel's exiting the house with the dog Meg, saying, "Oh, I had to run in and get the dog, but I can't get Mum. I don't know what's happened." So obviously the fire, the police, ambulance, everyone was called. And when the police asked Daniel, what happened here, Daniel just said that he woke up to a noise. He heard an intruder. The intruder saw that he had seen him, and so he freaked out and he threw a hammer at him, and then he just ran. He bolted out of the house. So at this point, Daniel's gone in to check on his mum and be like, "Hey, there's an intruder in the house," and then found her bludgeoned to death and the house on fire. So that's why he went and got the brother and then the dog and then left. His story didn't entirely add up though. Forensics actually found 2 hammers in the house, and one of them was clearly forensically tested, whatever, as the murder weapon. The thing is though, the murder weapon wasn't in the bedroom. There was another hammer in the bedroom, so it was almost like it was put there as a distraction, that's the murder weapon, even though it wasn't. It also didn't really make sense that an intruder would violently beat this woman up for no reason, not steal anything, not take anything, and then see a young boy and be afraid of him. But you just killed the mum. Why are you afraid of a child? It didn't really make a lot of sense. The police asked around and there wasn't any known enemies to Jacqueline. There wasn't any beef going on. There was no reason for anyone to have come and wanted to hurt her. And Jacqueline's boyfriend, as soon as he heard the news, he came home straight away. He was distraught. He was absolutely devastated. He really loved her. And the first thing that he thought was, Daniel's involved. That was the first thing that he thought. And so he mentioned this to police and said, I think you need to question Daniel. I have a gut feeling something's not right here. And the police already thought it was a little bit suspicious, his story. So they were like, okay, we'll look into this, So the police looked into Daniel a little bit deeper. They took his computer and they went through his computer. Now, Daniel had deleted the script in which he described in detail the murder that he literally just committed, but he hadn't deleted it thoroughly enough, and the police were able to retrieve it. And so they had this entire script literally detailing what has happened. So now Daniel was arrested for suspicion of murder, and once he was actually being questioned and was presented with the information, he owned up to it. And he confessed, he told the truth that he killed her. That being said, as soon as he was on trial and he was being cross-examined, he lied again. He stuck with his earlier original story that there was an intruder in the house and it wasn't him and he had nothing to do with it, despite already having confessed and despite obviously the story that he wrote. And he was actually quite snarky while he was being cross-examined, while he was on the stand, while he was on trial, which it generated more press coverage because it was this tiny little 14-year-old boy. He was very skinny. He looked very nerdy. He looked quite shy and awkward and sad. And his lawyers must have been kicking themselves that he didn't play into that, because had he have played into that and acted like he was a shy little scared kid and so scared of this intruder, he might have very well gotten away with it. But it's the fact that he was really quite snarky, just very arrogant and very cocky. But he even went so far as to be sitting, getting questioned, and he looked Jacqueline's boyfriend in the eye and went like this, dragged his thumb across his neck. That is a whole different level of arrogance and just, it's horrible, and shows a complete and utter lack of remorse for what he had done to his own mother, which says a lot, I feel like. It also went to show how tough he thought he was and how intimidating he thought he was. But as I said, he was a tiny kid. He was very scrawny, nerdy looking, weird, awkward, had no social skills, and Jacqueline's boyfriend wasn't intimidated by him. He wasn't threatened by him. he wasn't even angered by him. He just sat there and thought, you know what? He's delusional. Like, he thinks he's being intimidating right now. He is delusional. On the 2nd of April 2012, Daniel Bartlam was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years. In 2028, he will actually be eligible for parole. So if the parole board determines and deems that he is no longer a threat to society, he may very well be walking the streets as a free man in 8 years. I think a majority of people that I've seen talking about this case believe that that's not fair, it's wrong, he was brutal, he did the wrong thing, he had no remorse, why should he get to live free now? But there's a very small minority of people who think that he does deserve a second chance, he does deserve to be, rehabilitated and live a free life because he was so young when he did what he did and he didn't understand the full consequence of what he was doing. I'm not even sure where I stand on that. I don't think he would have been rehabilitated because where he was imprisoned as a child, they had a lack of resources for mental health and for psychiatric help. So it's very hard for me to believe that someone with that level of issues going on could be rehabilitated on their own, because he didn't have the help he needed. So I doubt it, but we will have to see what happens. I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that he should be given a second chance to be rehabilitated out of prison, or do you think he should stay in prison for his whole life? What do you think about murder in general? Let me know in the comments down below, or you can head over to my Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, which are all linked in the description down below. Make sure you go check them out. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos I post every single Thursday, all about true crime, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Make sure you guys are being safe out there. Never watch soap operas because they're dumb as hell. Never write a detailed plan about the murder you're planning to commit because it'll get found and you'll go to prison. And most importantly, never have children because they are gonna turn on you and kill you in your fucking sleep. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye! And the police were able to re-upload it, or what's it called? You know what I mean, when they look at it. They looked at it, they read it. I don't know what I'm talking about. The word just literally escaped my head. It's like Harry Potter when they go, whoop, there goes my brain.